8830 Idaho. Interview Series, Maria Town, interviewed by Fantasy Bias.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 8830 Idaho interview series. My name's Fantasy. I use she, her pronouns, and my affiliation with this campaign is basically just being a member on the committee, working with them to do planning, organizing, and finding folks that are really impactful to the disability justice movement. I am a woman of color from Idaho. I have a disability. It is transverse myelitis, so a physical disability, and I've been navigating it for a couple of years now, but just getting more into the disability justice movement. I'm from Idaho. I grew up there, love my hometown, but now I go to the University of San Diego, so I am based in San Diego right now as a rising third year, majoring in sociology. Just very excited and passionate about learning, education, and recently about a lot of disability justice movements, campaigns, and any ways that I can get involved. I've been involved in Idaho and in San Diego, and I had the opportunity of speaking at the Women's March in Idaho a couple years back. So I'm super empowered to speak with Maria Town today as a fellow woman just doing advocacy work. And so in this interview, we'll be talking with Maria Town and the amazing work that she has done for the disabled community, and also with the celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act this year being the 30th anniversary, just kind of diving into everything that inspires us, drives us, and what we can do next as for action items to continue the disability justice movement and just be in more collaboration. So please welcome me in interviewing Maria Town, just kind of going in a background of her. There's so much to learn about her, so I'm super excited we get to dive into that today. Even though it's a short time period, still super exciting. She is the president and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities, and I was actually an intern for them this summer, so AAPD, and we got to do a lot of organizing work, learning about disability history, making policy memos, and we also got the chance to have a one-on-one with her as interns and then as the president of the actual organization. It's her 1 year anniversary, if I am correct. So just doing amazing work in this 1 year, and then just previous work that she has done. She has worked in the White House. She has done a fashion show for disability representation, and also just very involved in the youth development and youth involvement and getting that movement going and getting them excited and energized. She's won many different awards and also just been involved in the community, whether it's intersectional or specific for the disabled community. So we are going to go in with some questions for her. As a youth, I have so much that I want to know and so much that I can learn from you. So thank you for being here. But if you want to kind of go into a background on yourself, kind of explaining what AAPD is, what it stands for, the impact that it has, and how you got involved.
Absolutely. So Fantasy, thank you so much for reaching out and for talking with me today. I just have to say, it was such an honor to have you participate in AAPD's internship program. You bring such passion and energy to all of your work, and I know that we as staff learned a lot from you, as did everyone in the cohort. So just, I am incredibly grateful to share this space with you right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. So AAPD, the American Association of People with Disabilities, is a national cross-disability civil rights organization. And to me, one of the most powerful things about AAPD is actually that cross-disability component. We're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we can't do that without acknowledging what it took to bring all of these different facets and silos of the disability community together to organize across the country and advocate for comprehensive civil rights protections.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about the ADA and I talk about what preceded its passage, I know that people with disabilities were segregated from mainstream society. We were kept in institutions or kept at home. We were also segregated from one another. There were, spaces and places for blind individuals, deaf individuals, people with intellectual disabilities, and you didn't see a lot of collaboration across those groups. And that is a way of dividing our power. And so AAPD, as a cross-disability organization, works across and with people who have vastly different disability identities and experiences. And, one of the things that can get tricky is all of these different people and communities may have different positions on policies and priorities. And AAPD has to navigate all of that and push for outcomes that will benefit everyone. The other piece that is so important is that we focus on civil rights. We are not a service delivery organization, and service delivery organizations are incredibly important in the disability space. But we need organizations, organizers, and advocates who focus explicitly on the rights piece, so that we can achieve equal opportunity, full inclusion, community integration, all of the goals of the ADA. And so that's what AAPD does and is. I got involved with the organization actually first as a mentor for AAPD interns. Yeah. And I can remember when I was your age, Fantasy, getting information about the AAPD internship program, and I did not want to go near it because, I've lived with my disability, cerebral palsy, my entire life. And growing up, I was never told that my disability was inherently bad, but I was also never told that it was good, And so I absorbed a lot of messages about my body, about my disability, and that I needed to distance myself from it. And so I could not understand why I would want to pursue an internship program that was focused on disability when I was trying to overcome this thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And, now looking back, it's like, I wish I'd had mentors in my life who could have shown me the value of that experience, because when I finally realized that disability could be an identity that I took pride in, I was just like, wow, I want to connect with other disabled peers. I want to learn disability history. And that's what y'all do in the AAPD internship program. And also, one of my biggest pieces of advice for disability advocates, people who want to work in disability policy, your personal experience is incredible, but it's also not enough. You have to do the work and the research to understand people and communities' experiences who can be drastically different than your own. And the internship program catalyzes that, right? You're connecting with people who have vastly different disability experiences than you do, and you're learning about all of these issues from completely new perspectives. So I got involved as a mentor and met some incredible people, folks who are now advocates that I look to and admire. And anyway, we can get into how I got to this job and more. Yes. Anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that I can definitely attest to AAPD doing that for me. There's so much to what you're saying, and I'm just shaking my head. I'm trying not to interject, but I definitely resonate with a lot of things that you're saying. I was diagnosed about 8 years ago, and at first my diagnosis, like you were kind of saying, was I'm overcoming this. I'm going to be able to walk again. I'm going to be able to be, not have a disability. It's only going to take a matter of time, and I'm an inspiration. And then kind of reality to where I was like, wait, what am I dealing with? How can I navigate just day to day? My success doesn't mean I need to be at a certain point. It's kind of just my mentality, my mental state, my emotions, what drives me. I'm still the same person. I'm just navigating life differently. And I would always call it a two-world perspective. I would have this side of when I grew up and what I was thinking of, and then I'd have this other side of when kind of my life kind of switched around and I was able to think about things much differently. And I remember at one point, it was probably 4 years or a couple years after I was diagnosed, and I researched my disability because it's very rare. And I just was like bawling. I'm crying. I'm like, what do you mean? What does this mean? What do I do with this information? So that's when I steered away from it. But then I think, like you were saying, having that community, having those mentors coming to you and just letting you know that like this is an opportunity to have a different experience and to share what that's like. Whether we think it's good or bad initially, we can take what it is with our experience and be able to share that. And in AAPD, I've learned a lot of self-advocacy and, like you said, doing the research part, because it kind of comes naturally sharing what I have experienced, but what have other folks experienced to where I can also advocate for them, or I can know about non-visible and non-physical disabilities, because I was kind of clueless to what that meant and what their experiences were. So thank you so much for sharing that. And if we can just kind of go into your background, you did kind of mention and disclose your disability, but how did that get you passionate about what you're involved in now, and what did growing up look like for you? And was it very active, or did you get more active as you got older?
I definitely got more active as I got older. So I grew up in Louisiana, and I've had kind of two different experiences. I was born and lived for the first third of my life in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is the capital, and a more urban area of Louisiana. I attended public schools. I was in mainstream schools, and then I moved to a town called Hammond, which is a very rural area of the state. So when I was growing up, I was really the only kid with a visible disability in a lot of my classrooms. And thankfully, my family always had very high expectations, and they were committed to me being in integrated settings. And, as a child, especially because this is just how I arrived in the world, I didn't realize the level of advocacy that particularly my mom was doing to make sure I went into Girl Scouts. And, I was in a Girl Scout troop that was full of like weirdos and geeks. And it was such a wonderful experience because we were all different in some kind of way. And it was never like, oh, Maria, we're going to go hike up this, trail and mountain. Like, let's figure out another thing for you to do. It's like, no, how do we make sure Maria does this with us? And so, we got into all kinds of hijinks. There was a tweet going around that's like, what memory of yours from elementary school describes who you are now? When I was in about first or second grade, I can't remember, I wanted to do the jungle, I wanted to play on the jungle gym. I wanted to do the monkey bars. That is like literally not something I've ever been able to do. Yeah. But what I did is I organized my classmates, and one of them hoisted me up on his shoulders, and like two other people were monitoring in case folks dropped me. And I did the monkey bars, and of course we all got in trouble. Like what my class aide like broke us up. This was so dangerous. Mm-hmm. But I was like, oh yeah, I've been an organizer for a while. I just didn't realize.
Yes, right? Yes.
And so, growing up, I was in some special education services. I was on benefits, right, which helped my family pay for critical physical therapy and other durable medical equipment that I needed. But again, I didn't realize all of the systems that I was connected to. And I didn't have a disability identity. I thought about my disability like I think about my hair. It's brown. Okay. I have cerebral palsy. Okay. And when I was in high school, I took my first speech and debate class, and that was something that I was naturally very good at. And so I began to compete in original oratory competitions. And at that time, I made a choice not to do speeches about disability because you knew as soon as I got up to take that stage that I was disabled, and I didn't want people to write me off as a kind of one-trick pony. Mm. And then when I was a sophomore, I was invited to compete in a pretty prestigious competition. And I wrote a speech on educational inequities in Louisiana. And I was becoming more radicalized around this topic because my brothers both have learning disabilities, and I was witnessing the disparities that they experienced on a regular basis because education was not accessible to them. They were getting marked as boys with behavior problems and being punished for their frustrations when really, like, they couldn't access the material. And so I wrote this speech, and my teacher said, Maria, this is a great speech, but we want you to write a speech about your disability, because if you write that, we know you'll win. And what they wanted was inspiration porn, right? Like, I didn't know, right, that that's what it was called. I didn't have that framework yet, but I knew that's what they were looking for. And I remember being so angry. I felt used, but I was competitive, right? And I wanted to do this. And so I remember thinking when I was 16, and I didn't curse at all, but I remember thinking, if I write a speech about disability, it's gonna be a damn good one. And so I wrote exactly what they were looking for. It's not a speech I would give today. And it was very much, inspiration, overcoming, but they were right. I won. I won at regionals, I won at state, I won at nationals. And I spoke in front of like 1,500 people, right? But it was at the state competition that I had a moment that changed my life. In the semifinal round, there was a woman who, at the conclusion of my speech, was crying. And I don't mean like just crying, she was ugly crying, like tears rolling down her face, snot coming out of her nose. And my speech was meant to move people, but this was too much. So I went up to her and I said, ma'am, are you okay? And she said, my sister has cerebral palsy. She can't walk, she can't talk. But when I saw you on that stage, I knew that you were speaking for her. And that was really the first time that I understood, A, I have a gift that I need to use, and B, my experience as a disabled person gives me a unique perspective on the world, and that perspective is valuable. And I can use this gift and this perspective to advocate for others like me. And what I've learned since I've been in this movement is that you don't speak for people, you create opportunities for people to speak for themselves. And so that's something that drives me to this day. So from that point on, in my own way, where I had basically zero guidance, I tried to understand how I could be a better disability advocate for myself, for my brothers, and learn more about the policies that really impact people's day-to-day lives. And it wasn't, truly, it took another 4 or 5 years for me to understand what that really meant. But I got there eventually.
Yes, thank you so much. That's so beautiful. I tried not to get too emotional too. I was about to ugly cry. You got me there. And I said, wait. No, that's so amazing. Like I said, I feel like I can resonate with a lot of things that you're saying, and thank you for that. Definitely from the non-disabled side and seeing it as inspiration porn to actually connecting with your experience and seeing how much it can motivate and just resonate with others is very moving. I appreciate that so much. So thank you. And as we talk about that, I kind of just would love to know the opportunities, or maybe like the snowball effect of opportunities that happen for you to be where you're at today. And if you want to talk about your experience at the White House, and then just how you got also to being in this presidential position with this organization, how these opportunities aligned, or maybe just how did they not align? Was it coincidence? Was it, did you do certain things to get there? Just basically, as a young person, it's very inspiring to know the different ways we can evolve and be in different positions of awareness.
Sure. So before I get into that, I have to acknowledge the incredible amount of privilege that I have, and how that privilege has contributed to me being able to access these opportunities. I am white. I have parents who both completed college, who were literate enough to navigate all these systems. I graduated from a really elite institution, and all of these things and more have contributed to where I am today. And if I were to say, like, I got here through a lot of hard work, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But all of these other factors contribute to it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I graduated college, like many today, in the middle of a recession. And I have never been somebody who has had a clear-cut plan for what I wanted out of my life. I was not the young person who said, like, I want to be a doctor and I'm going to go to medical school. That was not me. Instead, I knew what my values were. I knew the impact that I wanted to have on the world. And so I wanted to find work that would allow me to have that impact, but I wasn't prescriptive about what the work could be. And so when I was graduating college, I almost had no job, right? Like, I was applying to different places, I got rejected. And again, similar to when I was in high school doing speech and debate, when I was in college, I got very involved on campus. I ultimately became the Student Government Association president. And when I did that, I didn't focus a lot on accessibility or disability because, again, I didn't want people to think like, of course she's going to do that. I would always tell people when they would ask me, are you going to do anything about disability? I would say, well, my job is to represent the students. And so if that's what the students want, that's what I'll do. But at the very end of my term, like right as the new president is moving in and I'm like, have no idea where I'm going after graduation, I wrote up a memo to the vice provost and I said, Mr. Vice Provost, Emory is okay on accessibility. We could be doing a lot better and here are my ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And gave him this memo and he said, well, Maria, do you want to do this? And I said, yeah. And then he goes, do you want me to pay you to do this? And I said, yeah.
Better. Why not?
And so he gave me this job that was only supposed to last for the summer, right? What I now know is called contingent labor, right? I wasn't being paid like the amount of money that I was offered. When I think about like what I would offer somebody else in my position, right? If somebody did this to me at AAPD, I would be like, how could you offer someone a salary that low?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I took this job, and of course, my 3 months came up, and he was like, oh, here's another 3-month contract. Here's another 3-month contract. And I wound up doing this job for about a year, but in the process of working on in that position, I had to help hire a new associate director of the Office of Disability Services. And this person, this woman, was somebody who took one look at me, and she was like, you need a new challenge. Like, you are over Emory. And she was right. I was way over it. And she basically said, my dream for us is to go to Washington, D.C., and for you to meet my friend, Jennifer Kemp. And I was like, this is a little strange. Like, can you imagine, Fantasy, if I just told you right now, my dream for us is to go to...
Yeah, a dream, another day. I'll dream it tonight if you want, but we'll see. Yeah.
Right. So I kind of wrote her off, but I was wrong to do that because I think like a few months later, I had a free ticket to go to DC for a day with this woman that I barely knew to go network. And in that process, I met Jennifer Kemp, who was the first adult woman with cerebral palsy that I'd ever met in my life. And she had a career, she was married, she had children, she owned a house. This was the first person like me who I ever saw who had the life that I wanted for myself, and she worked at the U.S. Department of Labor, focused on youth disability employment policy. And in that conversation, I remember her saying, like, Maria, you're great, but we don't have any jobs available. And I said, that's okay. Meeting you has changed my life. Your work is incredible. I'm just so glad to know you exist. And I stayed in touch. And then a few months go by, and I literally get a random phone call from someone I don't know, from the Department of Labor, saying, we'd like to get we understand you met Jennifer Kemp. We'd like to get your thoughts on youth and disability and employment. And I genuinely thought, well, I'm young, I'm disabled, I'm employed. Mm-hmm. Here you go. Completely candid conversation. What I didn't know is that it was a job interview. And so fast forward, I wind up getting offered a position at the Department of Labor. And I felt completely unprepared. When I envisioned my life and my career, I had this mistaken idea that in order to work for the federal government, you had to be pretty advanced in your career. Like the position that I got as a policy advisor in the Office of Disability Employment Policy, I thought would be a position that I got when I was like going to retire, you know? Totally wrong. And I think from that position, I just began to inhale any information I could about disability, disability policy, identity, and history. And I really did so much research to understand issues and potential solutions. But one of the things, and I know we've talked about this before, one of the struggles that came with having a job that was so meaningful to me personally was I often had to toe the agency line, even if I disagreed with the position myself. Mm-hmm. And so after about 2.5-ish years, maybe 2.5-ish years, I felt like I was losing touch with my own voice. And I knew that my voice was one of the most powerful things that I have, right? Mm-hmm. And so I started a blog. I started a blog that was focused on shoes, called CP Shoes. And because of my disability, I wear out shoes very, very quickly. It is difficult for me to find shoes that are fashion forward and cute and sexy that I can actually walk in. And there are a lot of things that we tie to things like shoes, like professionalism, right? Like I knew as a visibly disabled person that people would doubt my competency from the moment I walked into a room. And the last thing I wanted people to judge me for was my, busted up looking shoes, right? So I started this blog where I would photograph my shoe as I destroyed it. And I would say like, naturalizer, woman's shoe worn 15 times cost $60. Mm-hmm. And here it is. It's done. Mm-hmm. And I basically wound up using shoes as a way to talk about disability. And because so many people understand what it's like to have shoes that don't work for them, it became this space where non-disabled people felt like, oh, I can understand this. And then as I blogged, more people with disabilities would write in about their issues or relationships with shoes. So it became this community space. Mm-hmm. And I got to know a lot of grassroots advocates that way. Mm-hmm. And because of those two areas of expertise, both the kind of grassroots advocacy expertise and this like federal, government policy expertise, that's sort of when the White House called. At the time, so in President Obama's first administration, he had someone who was a senior advisor to the president focused on disability in both the Office of Public Engagement and the Domestic Policy Council, and his name was Kareem Dale. From 2012 on, the White House did not have a permanent full-time person focused on disability. And they were kind of pulling in people for short periods of time to do work on disability, but ultimately they would have to go back to their previous agency. And Taryn Williams was detailed to the White House in the Office of Public Engagement. She was somebody who was a friend and a colleague. She was actually the person who called me from the Department of Labor initially, who I had no idea who she was. And she was in this detail. I knew that her detail was ending. And I remember thinking like, I wonder who's going to get that job. And in my head, I thought I would be really good at that job, but it's not my time. Again, I was writing off my own credibility because I was young, because I assumed that you had to like check certain boxes. And Taryn called and asked, like, would you consider being in the pot of people, for this position? And I said, sure, not thinking anybody would take me seriously. And then I got another phone call, and another phone call. And ultimately, they offered me the job, but they also offered it to me full time. Like I, this was not a detail. They had communicated what's called an urgent need for this position to the Office of Management and Budget. And so basically for the last 2 years of the administration, I worked as a senior associate director in the Office of Public Engagement, focused on disability and older adults. And, I think for me, there are a couple of keys to my career path. One is not being committed to a prescriptive plan and being open to opportunities when they present themselves, and not having judgments about who can provide support or knowledge or even other opportunities, right? Another, big lesson I've learned is you, meaning anyone, if you're in a role, you will have what it takes. And sometimes having what it takes means finding the right people to help you. It doesn't mean that you have to do everything yourself. Like, interdependence has been a key to my success. And the other thing that I think has just been crucial has been being willing to take risks. When I moved from Atlanta to DC, I didn't know anyone. I was moving to entire regions of the United States. And I was moving on my own. And when I switched from being a career federal employee, that's a job that's like guaranteed, for life. I went to go work for the White House. That job had an expiration date. My family thought that I was making the wrong choice. They're like, why would you give up this basically guaranteed job, guaranteed salary with benefits to go work for the White House, where you will be scrambling to look for a job in less than 2 years? And I said, this is an opportunity to work for the President of the United States. That president happens to be Barack Obama. Like,
no big deal.
It's that, right? Mm-hmm. But it was the same thing when, so I'm not trying not to be partisan, but like November 2016 happens, the world looks very different than I anticipated. And I am a disabled woman. I need access to healthcare, as so many of us do, right? And so I knew that I was going to have to find a job fast after my role at the White House ended, because I didn't want to rely on the ACA marketplace when I knew that Congress and the president were going to try to destroy the Affordable Care Act. Thanks to this disability community's advocacy, they did not. But I didn't know that. And so, probably like mid-November, I got a call from Lex Frieden, and I don't know if he's come up in your ADA celebrations. But
not yet.
Not yet. Well, so Lex Frieden was the executive director of the National Council on Disability for President Reagan when they wrote the report Toward Independence. Toward Independence provided the framework for the ADA. And Lex actually quit his job at NCD, the National Council on Disability, to go lobby for the ADA. So Lex is a key figure in all of this. And he's somebody that I worked closely with at the White House. Lex lives in Houston. And he called me and he said, Maria, we have this job opening in Houston. I really think you should consider it. The mayor is great. I've already talked with him about you. Please tell me you'll come down to Houston and just talk to him. And I thought, Houston? What? Houston, Texas?
Yeah.
And I don't drive. So I was just like, how is this going to work? Like, really? But I said, okay, Lex, I'm going to consider consider this. And so I went to Houston in December of 2016 and went and sat down and talked to the mayor, whose name is Sylvester Turner. And, you know, again, I took this seriously, but I also I had no sense of anybody. And so I put together this whole thing on like, here's what cities are doing across the country. Here's what Houston's challenges are. Here's what I think you need to do. And in this conversation, you know, I said like, Mayor, Houston is behind on all of these metrics. And he's like, don't challenge me. I'm like, no, this is your challenge. If you want, you know, Houston to be the most accessible city or the most inclusive city, you have to make strategic investments in X, Y, and Z. And, you know, you have a mayor's office for people with disabilities that has 2 staff and a budget of like less than $300,000 for the 4th largest city in America. That's not going to work. And when I talked with him, he asked me these questions. He said, Maria, disability is incredibly diverse. How do you make sure that like marginalized people with disabilities are connected to broader disability advocacy movements? And I was like, whoa, I can't believe you understand this. And then he goes, how do you make sure that people with Alzheimer's disease and traumatic brain injuries understand their rights as disabled people? And I was just like, what?
Yes.
And so at the end of this conversation, he was just like, look, I really like you. I want to offer you this job. Come work for us. And I did that, you know, and in February of 2017, I moved to Houston and began working there. And that was a completely different world. Local municipal government, federal government work is entirely different. It was an incredibly hard job. So was the White House. And part of my experience in Houston was understanding really the kind of work that I wanted to do. And with AAPD, I'd worked with AAPD a lot, especially when I was in the White House. And when the CEO job became open, you know, a lot of folks reached out and said, are you going to apply? And I said, nope, I don't want that job. Don't want it. And I had to be convinced to apply. But as I went through the process, you know, I thought to myself that I had major critiques of national organizations like AAPD, and I could either choose to not engage and, you know, continue the work in Houston, or I could choose to try to address those critiques myself and to make it better. And that's what I chose to do. And I'm really glad I'm where I am. And I think even in my first year, we've been able to do a lot of great work around things like voting, you know, shifting the internship program online, creating new opportunities. And, you know, with COVID, you know, advocating to make sure that disabled people are centered in our response. It's been incredibly frustrating and incredibly draining, especially now that the Senate, you know, has decided to go home until Labor Day. Like, there will be no relief for coronavirus until at least mid-September, and it's just unconscionable. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's probably a much longer answer to your question than you wanted.
Thank you so much. I could just sit here and just listen to everything you have to say all day, and I'm sure there's a longer story. I think that we could have that another Zoom call, but before we do have to Zoom out of here in a couple of minutes, thank you so much for sharing genuinely. Thank you for taking the time and the energy to really share your story. I know many people ask you these questions, but I think it's just the more you talk about them, the more awareness it brings. And thank you so much. I'm going to extend us a couple minutes because you did were able to touch on some topics that intersect very much and are very prevalent today. The ADA and voting, elections, and COVID, it is coming up. And with our last couple of minutes, if you have any advice or just, there are some questions that I do have, but really just what's the connection with all of those and how can we get into voting? How can we get more people with disabilities to vote? How can we change the stigma of maybe of voting or people with disabilities, and how will COVID impact that, do you think, in the next couple of months and even after the election?
Sure. So, um, the disability vote is incredibly powerful. And in the 2018 midterm elections, more than 14 million people with disabilities voted, which is an 8.5% increase over the 2014 midterm elections. It's incredible. COVID and its impact on the election could potentially throw all of that progress, push it all back. So right now, many voters, including voters with disabilities, are having to choose between protecting their health and safety and protecting their lives and participating in democracy. That is an impossible choice that we should not ask anyone to make. The reason that so many people are being forced into that impossible choice is because one of the solutions to voting during coronavirus is vote by mail. Right now, in every state, people with disabilities are eligible to vote by mail. So to the first part of your question, one of the things that we can do as a community is make sure all of our friends, family members, other community members, our fellow churchgoers know what the process is to vote by mail, that they've requested their ballots, that they understand deadlines. And I will say, because of what we're seeing with the post office, we need to be requesting our ballots as early as possible if you have to request them, and we need to be mailing them back in as early as possible to make sure they get counted. But for many people with disabilities, vote by mail is not accessible. Whether it's folks with print disabilities like blindness or learning disabilities, other people, particularly in rural communities or Native communities, may not have access to a regular post. So we also need to make sure that states have the funding they need to execute safe and accessible in-person polling. What we don't want to see is what happened in Kentucky recently, where they shut down so many polling centers and forced people into this one giant polling center, right? We want to see polling centers that continue to be open. We need people who are at less high risk volunteering to be poll workers. The majority of poll workers in the United States are older adults who are at high risk for COVID. We need younger people, again, folks who are not at high risk, to volunteer to be poll workers, to commit to those hours, to keep as many polling places as possible open. And again, I mentioned that the Senate has, left the building. If the Senate were in session right now, I would say that the Senate needs to approve funding for states that don't require a federal match, so that they can be investing in accessible voting machines, accessible polling places, things like that. The other thing that we've seen in Florida, for example, they're beginning a pilot program for online balloting. And this is, again, yet another solution to the vote by mail problem with accessibility. And for me, I don't think that there is a single best solution. I think we need to be utilizing every possible way to vote that we can. Curbside voting, not ideal if you don't have a car, but for some people it will work. Like, let's make sure it can happen. And so that's what we should be doing. I'll say that the general election is November 3rd. In states like Texas, where I lived before, my request, I needed to register to vote a month before, like October 5th. So let's keep those deadlines in mind. I would also say, don't be afraid to ask people if they're registered to vote. Hi, how are you? Are you registered to vote? Right? Great to hear from you. Are you registered to vote? Do you know? Do you have a plan? And that is a common organizing tactic, asking people if they have a plan to vote. And typically, when we ask people that, we respond with, your polling place is located here. But this time around, we need to say, this is how you'll get your absentee ballot. If you need to request it, you need to do so by this date. So I would say get informed, look at your local Secretary of State's webpage or office, contact them. And also, if you experience voter suppression, make a complaint to your local protection and advocacy provider or to the Department of Justice. And, complaints like this, they make a difference. in so many ways. Hopefully, folks are aware of the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. This will restore the Voting Rights Act. Mitch McConnell has been sitting on this for quite some time, and so that's the other thing we need to do. This probably won't happen before the election, but we need to restore the Voting Rights Act to ensure that communities of color, people with disabilities, and so many others who experience disenfranchisement and voter suppression have the tools we need to combat it.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much. And so for any of you that are listening to, reading, or watching this video, you are now aware of the many resources and action items that can happen before we actually get into voting. And if y'all need any support or any guidance, feel free to reach out to our organizations. And before we head off, I would love if y'all would follow us on our social media handles. We do have our email, which is idaho30yearada@gmail.com. We have our Instagram, ADA30Idaho, Twitter, ADA30Idaho, and YouTube, ADA30Idaho. And then we have our Facebook page, which this will be posted on, and it's Idaho Hands Around the Capitol celebrating the ADA. So thank you so much, Maria. I love it. I love that we got to connect. I want to know so much more about you. And even though this was a longer video, I think there was a lot of informative information, a lot of action items that we could be looking forward to, or even community organizing that folks can plan in their local areas. And I know that I'm empowered to do that in San Diego as I go to school, and also reaching out to my folks in Idaho and making sure they are being supported in whatever way, whether that's promoting voting if you're unable to, or voting yourself, or taking folks to places, or even doing research on voting. But thank you so much for sharing your information on disability justice. Thank you for being a part of the movement and just being yourself. So many thanks, and thank you to our Idaho ADA celebration, the interview series this year. We're learning so much from so many folks. Had the honor of speaking with you, so thank you. I hope y'all have a great day, and tune into our next series in the next couple of weeks. Thank you. Bye, Maria.
A word collage in the shape of the United States with the word access highlighted and hashtag thanks to the ADA.